The following is a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club.
Welcome everybody to round 2 of the 2022 Spring Chess Classic. I'm Grandmaster Alejandro Ramirez here with Grandmaster Cristian Chirila to bring you all of the action.
Always a pleasure to be here with you in the studio, Alejandro. Welcome.
Always a pleasure to do commentary with a good friend, and we have an exciting event for you. Might not be the Singfield Cup, it might not be the US Champs, but it's an important stepping stone for many young and aspiring players to become stronger. A lot of them are trying to break into the 2700 group, and this is an excellent tournament for them to gain rating and to practice.
And what an amazing first round we had yesterday, Alejandro. All the players came very well prepared. We've seen a lot of improvements in all phases of the game. We saw some brilliant ideas in the opening. I remember that idea of Sam Sevian with the early e4. We saw some brilliant play in the endgame from Jeffrey Chong as these players were easing into the tournament. And now in round number 2, we have a lot of excitement on the board.
Let's catch you up on what happened yesterday as we have these standings after round number 1 in the A group. It was only young Jeffrey Chong that was able to pull off a victory. He did it against Mishra Antipov, a very clean win in that Scotch game. Meanwhile, we had draws that really favored one side. I would say that the biggest miss of the day was certainly by Dariusz Wirtz, who had a totally winning position against Kamil Dragun, but messed up a simple tactic and a perpetual was forced on the board.
And another very interesting game was the one between Ray Robson and Hans Niemann, with the pendulum swinging on both sides.
Absolutely, both sides certainly having a chance to win that one. It was a very fun game. Let's take a look at the standings in the B group. Here we had more decisive results. Elshan Moria Diabati, Christopher Yu, and Chris Repka were all able to defeat their opponents, and they sit on position number 1.
At the expense of Robert Hungaski, who is actually the rating favorite going into this event at 25.54. JJ Alimorandi and Harshit Raja, unfortunately for them, started with a loss.
Absolutely, and we'll see the players there in action. Let's take a look at the format of this event. We have 2 10-player round robins and classical chess. Time control is 90 minutes for 40 moves. You get an extra 30 minutes when you reach move 40, and all throughout a 30-second increment.
And the players may not mutually agree to a draw in less than 40 moves. This is going to guarantee a very combative tournament.
I like that rule a lot. I think that it forces the players to strategize differently, as they can't just show up the white pieces and claim a draw.
And let's go through the schedule as well, Alejandro. We started yesterday with round number 1. Every single round from now until the 8th round, including the 8th round, will start at 1 p.m. Central Time. The last and final round, Thursday, March 10, is going to start 2 hours earlier at 11 a.m. Central Time. And after that, we're going to have playoffs if necessary.
Of course, if we have a tie for the first place, we will be having those playoffs.
And you can also reach us and ask us any question, and we're going to try to answer it during the broadcast. You can find us on Twitter at #SpringChessClassic.
Absolutely. Join in on the conversation. We're going to be checking out our Twitter to see what the questions are. And let's take a look at what we have in store for you today, as we have the pairings for the A group. We see Sam Sevian playing against Mishra Antipov, Ilya Nishnik facing against young Hans Niemann, Aram Hakobian playing against Kamil Dragun. This is a battle of collegiate chess. Aram Hakobian, of course, representing Webster University, and Kamil Dragun representing the national champions in UTRGV, University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. Ray Robson, who graduated from Webster, is playing another player that graduated from Webster in Alex Lenderman, and Dariusz Wirtz is facing against Jeffrey Chong. This is certainly the matchup of the day. Young Jeffrey was the only victor yesterday. They faced each other several times through the last few months in very major tournaments. They played each other in the Singfield Cup, they played each other in the US Chess Championship, and now they are measuring against each other yet again here at the St. Louis Chess Club. We're going to certainly be putting an important emphasis on this game. Let's take a look at the B pairings. Robert Hungaski is trying to make his bounce back against Armand Mikhalian. JJ Alimorandi is doing the same against Abhimanyu Mishra. And meanwhile, Raja Harshit also trying to bounce back from his loss by playing against Chris Repka. Those two are, of course, teammates as they study under the tutelage of Grandmaster Cristian Chirila at University of Missouri. Sanghanin is playing against Elsha Maria Debati, and Christopher Yu is playing against Titus Stremavicius. Christopher Yu with a nice victory yesterday against Hungaski, certainly proved that he has technique from the opening all the way to the end game. Titus, a very dangerous opponent who is specializing in very sharp Sicilians with the black pieces. Unfortunately for us, that game is already done. Cristian, tell us a little bit about what happened in that one.
Speaking of very sharp Sicilians, Alejandro, this is exactly what we had today in that game that finished while these players were getting ready. In the first 2.5 hours, we had the game between Christopher Yu and Titus Stremavicius, the key game of group number B. Let's see how that played out. E4, C5, knight F3, knight C6, D4, CD4, an open Sicilian, knight takes D4, knight F6, knight C3, and now this move E6. Of course, black can play E5, that's going to translate into the Sveshnikov. They can even play the move D6, a lot of options, but he decides to go with this move E6. Now we see the move A3, a very intriguing decision. Of course, E6 immediately is trying to bring this bishop to B4 and create this pin against the knight on C3, putting direct pressure on the pawn on E4. There are a couple of ways in which you can avoid that. One of them would be to try to immediately create a direct attack with the move knight to B5, trying to swing this knight all the way to D6 with a check. Now black has a couple of options, one of them being a D6, which is most likely going to transpose into a Sveshnikov after knight to bishop to F4, E5, bishop to G5, and now we have the tabia of the Sveshnikov variation. Of course, black also has the option of playing the move bishop to B4, which leads to very, very intriguing positions. Instead of that, white decided to immediately sidestep from all these main lines with the move A3. And now we have bishop to E7, knight takes C6, B takes C6, and immediately a E5. Knight to D5, we see this knight centralized square for the knight protected by both pawns on C6 and E6, a very nice position for the knight. We see knight E4, queen to C7, F4, and F5. And now we have this position. And there was a very interesting moment at this point after the move G6, which was a huge mistake. And of course, it seems like you're weakening the dark squares. Of course, I'm going to try to immediately attack them. Well, that's not the correct decision. Actually, he was supposed to play the move queen to E2. He played the move queen to H4, which is a very natural move.
So tempting to throw it in checkmate, right?
You want to give it a checkmate, of course. It's so tempting, but unfortunately, this is not the correct move. He had a winning move, queen to E2. And the key point behind this idea is that if you take on F1, I'm not going to retake immediately on F1. I'm actually going to go queen to E5, attacking your rook. And now you're in big, big trouble along the dark squares. If you go something along the lines of rook to F8, I'm going to jump to G7. There's no more castle on the board for you. And now if you try to go rook to F7, well, this looks like a perpetual, right? I'm going to go queen G7, you're going to go rook F7. No, no, no. I can attack this checkmate with a tempo by taking the pawn on H7 as well. Everything falls in black's position. This is just game over. He missed this opportunity. He played the move queen to H4. And after that, we entered this endgame in which black understood very well this particular position. Right now, after rook to A4, rook takes A4, B takes A4. It seems like the white king is going to go all the way to A5, B6, and the pawn will promote. But the key in the position is that once your king reaches this square A5, I'm just simply going to place my bishop on this diagonal, D1, A4. I'm going to attack your pawn on A4, and you're not going to be able to move the king anywhere to support the push of this pawn. And the players played a few more moves, but they soon agreed to a draw. A draw in this game. Very interesting game, but it finished in a draw.
I think it's so easy to miss this kind of moves. Queen E2, knight takes F1. Your mind immediately thinks, well, I have to recapture the knight on F1 immediately, and then black has possibilities. But this Queen E5, Queen G7, what a beautiful concept. Unfortunately missed there by Christopher Yu, but a fair draw there. Let's take a look at the prize fund, why the players are in this tournament. It's not just experience. And last, there is a serious amount of money here at stake. In the A group, this is the way of supporting upcoming chess players. $6,000 for first prize, $4,000 for second. The prizes are split except for the first prize. Those are actually decided on a playoff. And meanwhile, in the B group, we have slightly lower prices, with $4,000 being first, 2,500 on second, and third at 2,000. Speaking of the B group, let's take a look at a game that is certainly close to finishing, as we have over there JJ Alimorandi not at the board, waiting for his opponent Abhimanyu Mishra, the youngest grandmaster in history, but not having a successful day here, as his pieces simply have no coordination. It's true that he's currently up a pawn. We can take a look at this position, but that's just about the only good thing. His king on e7 is in dire straits. These rooks are doing absolutely nothing, crashing against the pawns. These bishops are taking the queen side, nothing to defend there, and these beautiful rooks are well coordinated and keeping black at bay. So by all stretch of the imagination, this is absolutely hopeless for black. We expect JJ to collect this point relatively quickly, and I'm actually wondering, Cristian, if you have it up, what was the mistake here from the young grandmaster? It seemed like he was under pressure.
Yes,
from the
he
beginning.
was. Yes, he was. So we've seen this position starting from the beginning with this idea against the triangle setup for black with g3, immediately giving up a pawn for the initiative. This sort of ideas of giving up a pawn early in this particular opening seems to resemble some clashes in the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. So we're seeing a lot of players with the white pieces just saying, okay, take my c4 pawn. I'm just going to maneuver around here. I'm going to push my pawn in the center as we're seeing in the game. And then I'm going to play for long-term initiative. This is exactly what we're seeing in this game. Knight to g5, transferring the knight to e4, getting ready to jump potentially to a d6. And I'm trying to figure out exactly where the big mistake was, but it already seems quite difficult because, sure, you are some material up, but you have a lot of weaknesses and you don't have where to place your king. Of course, you cannot go on the queen side, but also if you try to go on the king side, well, I'm going to destroy your pawn structure in front of your king and checkmate you very quickly on the king side. So you're kind of in this limbo. Where am I going to put the king? And if you cannot move the king, well, you're not going to be able to make the connection between the rooks. You're not going to be able to harmonize your pieces. So after g5, we see this position, king to e7, but sure.
Yeah.
Do you want to have the king on e7? Not so much. And immediately, white is pushing on the king side and trying to create tension on this pawn structure right here. f5, queen to h5, tackling the weaknesses on this side. Well, you have to keep your rooks to defend the pawn structure. In the meantime, that's going to allow me to invade on the other side. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Well, this position seems to be kind of hopeless. It just seemed like a very slow but a decisive build-up in this game.
Nice game there from JJ. Certainly the coach is happy with his performance today. Good job, student. Yeah, this one looked very clean. And I've been wondering about this triangle setup with g3 that you mentioned becoming so popular, and it's really a sign of times changing. I remember that back in the day, in the early 2000s, this was considered actually dubious for the white side, and it was considered that the pawn could be safely taken. But now with our understanding of long-term initiative, it has become more and more obvious that black's position is full of danger.
Chess is changing indeed at the speed of light, and right now we see this doubling up of the rooks on the 8th rank on the defensive side for Mishra, but that's not going to help him. The bishop comes to b5, creating another pin in the position. Bishop to g5 will follow, and that's going to be all she wrote.
Yeah, this is going to be the end of the game. We have a couple of games that are quite interesting. Let me switch to the A group, as I wanted to take you through the game of Ray Robson and Alex Lenderman. Certainly, something has gone wrong here for Alex. Let's take a look at what happened. Another one of these English openings, but this time with g6 and e3. Certainly a very possible way for both sides. Not very heavy on theory, but maybe Ray didn't find anything against the Grunfeld, didn't find anything against some of the other Alex Lenderman openings, and decided, okay, let's go to something slightly less theoretical. Pushes an early pawn on c5. Another not so typical idea of the position. A lot of times they think this is a waste of time, but in certain Caro-Kann structures, c5 is possible. It's ambitious in the sense that it grabs space ask black, how are you going to deal with my loss of tempo?
Well, you see, I was taught that c5 is just not good in most of instances because black is immediately going to attack that pawn with the move b6.
Yes.
But nowadays we understand with the help of engines, with the help of Lila, the AI engines, it seems like everything is possible in chess.
Yes, absolutely. Even this scenario. And it seemed that anyway, black got, I wouldn't say a fully comfortable position, but a playable one. And I start looking at here, this position, and you're thinking, yes, black wants to play b6, and once you destroy the structure, the remaining c3 pawn is going to be a weakness, and black's going to be very happy. But where's the time? Where's the timing to do so? Because what ended up happening in the game is that by the time that black did play the move b6, I'm already exchanging your dark square bishop. I'm already hinting at problems that you might have on the king side. So I'm not saying that black is necessarily worse or much worse in this position, but still not out of the woods when it comes to solving all of the opening problems. Still, it seemed that the game was reasonable for both sides. Here you can see that white is transferring pieces to the king side, pushing h4, h5, trying to get a lot more activity on this side of the board. But Lenderman was doing a good job holding Robson back, even trying to create a little bit of his own counterplay here. But it was this decisive moment where Lenderman makes a very strange mistake. You can see that the last move by Ray Robson, rook a e1, targets his pawn on e7, puts a lot of pressure. You start looking at tactics involving something even like bishop d6 or bishop g5, trying to increase the pressure that you have on the dark squares. Black never really wants to play e6 for two big reasons. First, the bishop on f5 lacks squares. You don't ever know when a g4 push might trap it. And more importantly, this is like Swiss cheese, right? You start exchanging the dark square bishop, and nobody's defending the dark squares. So the move queen a8 to me is absolutely baffling. It's very shocking because you don't want to undefend this pawn on e7. Even if there was no tactic in the position, this is a strange move to me. That being said, there is a tactic in the position, and Spicy Caterpillar, which is Ray Robson's handle on chess.com, never misses the tactic. Rook takes e7, rook takes e7, rook takes e7. And I think at this point, Lenderman realized, uh-oh, I can't actually recapture the pawn on a2. I'm sure that was his idea. To me, this is very strange because I also think queen e3 is winning. But why go for that? This is actually a beautiful checkmate. You cannot take on a2 because of rook e8, king g7, h6, and the king hunt is not even very long. You can actually choose which way to checkmate the opponent. And if you're not able to recapture on a2, you're basically just lost. Bishop f6.
So this is what I think he missed.
Okay,
I think he saw that idea of rook takes a2, queen takes a2, but he said, okay, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to kick your rook away from e7 with bishop f6. But he forgot that after rook to e1, you can place the rook anywhere. e3, e2, e1. Probably he thought about rook to e2. He saw the idea of bishop to d3, displacing the rook from e2 and then recapturing on a2. He forgot that this bishop coming to f6 is actually going to cover a key square for the king, and the king is not going to be able to escape. Rook to e8, king to g7. Now it's a checkmate in one move with the move h6.
And Ray was even more brutal. After the move bishop f6, he said, why do I need to move my rook? As we mentioned, dark squares are very important here. There's not a lot of guard on the dark squares around the king. He said, my rook, it's a very good rook, but you can have it if it's going to cost you that bishop. When queen e3, Lenderman took, but I just don't see how you're going to defend all of these things, especially with the monster bishop on f4, coming to either e5 or h6. This queen is already very well placed. The rook is far away. Knight e5 is also an idea. Knight g5 is an idea. You certainly don't have the time to take on a2. Yes, up an exchange here for Alex Lenderman, but this looks hopeless again here for the black side. On a good day, you sacrifice the exchange, and you're relatively scot-free, but then you will still be down your pawn. Your king still will be weak. This looks like a decisive advantage to me.
Well, this one, Alejandro, is quite easy to assess because what you do is just count attackers versus defenders. And white has all of his pieces attacking the black king. It has the queen, the bishop, the knight, and the pawn. That's 4 attackers. How many defenders do you have? Well, at this moment, 0. The bishop on f5 doesn't matter because you need to defend the dark squares. Well, right now that bishop on f5 is only operating, obviously, on the light squares. So he's not going to be able to join the defensive side. The rook on the other side of the board, the queen on the other side of the board is just a hopeless situation.
Yes, as very well pointed out, in opposite colored bishops, we know that endgames tend to have these drawish tendencies. But in middle games, they actually become very sharp because it's impossible for the opposite color bishops to exchange against each other in a direct way. You have to do it in an indirect way. And in this case, black would love to exchange that light square bishop for the dark squared one, but that is simply not going to happen. Lenderman seems to be on his way to defeat today. Ray Robson playing a nice game.
Yeah, and you can see it on his face. He understands that he just simply doesn't have any counterplay at this point. Despite the fact that he is an exchange up, the white king is extremely safe. You cannot use that extra exchange to create any sort of attack against my king. And that's the big difference in the position. Your king is going to get checkmated in the next couple of moves.
That's right. All right, let's do a very quick around the horn to decide where we want to go next. So let's very quickly recap. Christopher Yu has has drawn against Titus Stremavicius. JJ Alimorandi is currently up a piece, and we expect Abhimanyu Mishra to resign at any moment. We can pull up the board to see just very quickly what's happening in the other ones. Well, I guess he doesn't resign. He wants to keep playing down a piece.
Not yet. We see that move. A rook to c3, but...
And there's an extra bishop. That's all we need to know.
There's an extra bishop on f4. Wow.
Okay. All right.
He's fighting.
He is fighting. He's a fighter. That's what makes all of these very young grandmasters so dangerous. Meanwhile, in the game of Raja Harshit against Chris Repka here, we have an absolute mess. This one was very clear-cut, in my opinion, a little bit earlier, but maybe it's still clear-cut. I think this is a very strong problem. D takes c4 is coming.
And the pawn on c3 is coming.
And the pawn on c3 is an absolute monster.
I'm going to use that as a decoy in order to win the knight on e3. Because
you're
most likely going to have to defend it. Yeah, probably rook to e1.
And the point is that, as you were mentioning, if you go it this way, then c2 attacks the rook. And this queen is overloaded defending the c2 square and defending the knight. You can't do both. This looks hopeless for white.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Let us continue just so that we have an understanding of all the games very quickly. This is Sam Hanin against Elshan Moria-Debari, who had a nice win yesterday against Raja Harshit. It looks like I can just take that pawn on a5, right? Isn't that 2 pawns?
Yes. So white is already a pawn up. Of course, as counter chance black has the 2 bishops. Nevertheless, it doesn't seem like there are enough targets for those 2 bishops. In fact, the only target that I can see in the position is the black king. We don't have the queens on the board, so we are in the endgame. Nevertheless, it seems like with 2 rooks on the board and with so many files open up on both sides of the board, well, it seems like white is just going to be able to target that king. And as you were mentioning, Alejandro, just take on a5. What's going to happen next?
Yeah, perhaps there's still a couple of issues because bishops are bishops and they're very powerful. It is an open position, but it's certainly a 2-result game. Here, the player from Texas Tech is the one putting the pressure. And to finish up on Group B, we have this wild game between Robert Hungaski and Arman Mikhailan. Not really sure what's going on. It seems like both kings are weak, not a lot of defenders around them, but hard to get to the kings properly. There is a threat on queen takes a2 right now. This looks like a huge mess to me. I don't have an engine on, so I have no idea what's happening.
Is it time to sacrifice? Rook takes d7?
Yeah, you start. This is how we operate, right? You think, how do I get the initiative? I don't want to waste some tempo defending like with a3 or something like that. Let's go for the kill. Rook takes d7, distract the bishop, maybe put this bishop on c4 with check.
But then the king goes to h8, and it doesn't seem like you're in time. Because the problem for white is that your king is not safe enough either, right?
Yeah.
The king should be potentially on a1. That's where he's going to be feeling very, very safe. On c1, not so much, because after queen takes e4, black has this option of cutting the king from reaching its safe square on a1 by playing the move bishop to f5. Not only that it locks that king on c1, where it's going to be very, very vulnerable, but also you're not able to create this battery on the b1, h7 diagonal and create potential threats of checkmate as white. So the bishop on f5, extremely powerful piece, and it doesn't seem like white has enough compensation for the lost exchange.
I agree. So maybe this is a little bit too happy. I would just leave this as a mess, and we'll come back to it. Hard to evaluate this position. Initial impression, I think it should be about equal, both sides having good chances. Let's move on to Group A, as we have Sam Sevian here against Misha Antipov. Black, if you counted it, is up a pawn, but certainly not in the driver's seat. This bishop on c5 is a bit of a monster defending this pawn on a3, putting pressure on e7, and making sure that the pawn on c6 is just not part of the game. There's also problems on the king side, as this pawn is being used as a battering ram against the pawn on g6. The pawn on h6 at some point might also cripple the dark squares around the king. That being said, Black's position looks very solid. It's hard to really put pressure on any point besides the g6 one, which can be very easily defended by either bishop f7, maybe even considering king f7. And Black, I would prefer to play white, but I don't see an easy way through, Cristian.
No, absolutely. And well, the problem that I'm seeing for Black right now is his time management. He only has 8 minutes for the next 13 moves. White, on the other hand, we know Sam Sevian tends to go into time trouble as well. But right now, we're seeing him on a comfortable 24 minutes on the clock. So that's a big plus for White in this position. Black is the one defending. Black is the one that is going to have to make very important decisions. As you were mentioning, bishop to f7 or king to f7. Which one are you going to go? I was checking with the engine, and actually if you go bishop to f7, you're almost lost.
Because of e5, I imagine.
No.
Really?
I'm just going to create a slow build-up against your king. The point being that you don't have 2 squares on the 7th rank. And whenever your king is going to get threatened, I'm going to go rook to b8 right now.
I like this move, actually.
Rook to b8. And for example, if you try to go something along the lines of rook takes b8 and height on g7, well, tough luck, because I have this key idea of h6, giving up that second pawn. King takes h6, followed by queen to f8, and that's just going to be game over.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful. Right now, we're seeing Misha Antipov thinking, pondering his next option. Potentially, king to f7 has to be played at this point.
So a difficult situation here for your student here, also a student from the University of Missouri. Very strong addition, by the way. Speaking of collegiate students, let's go to mine. Dario Schwirtz here playing against Jeffrey Chong. I really like his position. He sacrificed a pawn for the initiative, very similar to what we saw in this kind of G3 Slavs. You can definitely see the similarities in the structure. Jeffrey does have a knight on a6, a knight on d5, trying to hold on to the position. It feels like if white gets in knight c5 and e4, you can put very serious pressure here on black. You also have the possibility of taking on c6. I'm not sure why that pawn would not be hanging. But what really upsets me is Darius really have a minute and 30 seconds left.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my God.
2 minutes. 2 minutes after the move h4.
Much better. Oh man, this is going to be rough. He has
20 moves to go.
20 moves to go.
Why do they do something about this? You have to do something about this.
I mean, I've been trying. He's been my student for 6 years. I'm giving up. All right. Next up, we have Aram Hakobian against Camille Dragoon. Here we can count them up again, and it is the player from Webster, Aram Hakobian, that is currently up a pawn, and he has 2 passers against Black's d-file passer, but this pawn's not going anywhere. If it ever gets to d2, it'll be swallowed up by the king on f2 and one of the rooks. So this pawn really needs to stay on d3 and maybe be protected by the move c4. But the moment you play c4, this rook is just going to jump to b4, attack this pawn. I don't see how to defend this weakness. This looks pretty bad for Black. Yeah, I think this endgame might just be objectively lost. Some techniques still required. I wouldn't say that Black is completely hopeless here. Certainly I would play on. But I think that Aram should have the technique to bring this one home. So we did see the Ray Robson game. We still have Alex Lenderman thinking after queen takes e7. And we have the only game we haven't looked at so far between Ilya Nishnik with the white pieces against the rising star of Hans Niemann. And this one feels like something went really wrong for Black just because of the way these knights are located in f6 and h7.
Nevertheless, I am a pawn up.
You are 1 pawn up. I do have
Black.
bishops. It's Black to move in this position.
How are we doing on time? Okay, so we see 12 minutes for Hans and thinking. And
20
how
for
about
Ilya?
20.
20, which is actually a low amount of time for Ilya. He's such a fast player. One of the most dangerous things about Ilya Nishnik is the speed that he plays. It's like playing a mini Nepo. He just blitzes out all his games,
Absolutely.
and they're all accurate. Very tough to play practically against him.
Absolutely. So let's see. What if you just simply take on e4?
I was wondering about that. I think I do have to play the move. I have two options. I could take immediately on f7.
Well, I am threatening knight to c3, right?
Oh, you are threatening knight to c3. That is
So
a
you
very
have
good
to be a
question.
bit
Because I
careful
don't
about
have
that.
bishop d5. This is important. Because the move knight c3 forks the queen and the bishop. So it gives me a very important tempo.
And I think the key line that we need to calculate is what happens after bishop to c1?
But
Can you go knight to c3? Can you still go knight to c3?
I don't have an option right here, right? If it doesn't work, I'm losing.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have to go knight c3. It attacks this queen. If you take on a3, the point is that I give this check, and then I will recapture my piece. This looks very good for black. You'll retain your extra pawn. I don't see any problems.
Well, I'm going to take on f7, and you're going to probably lose the e5 pawn as well, and maybe even the c5 after that. So maybe it's not that clear. What do you do after bishop takes f7?
That is a good question.
That knight is still a little bit out of play.
Yes, that is true. I am wondering what I can do here. I have some kind of funny lines. Knight f6, rook takes e5, rook takes b5, rook takes. I was wondering if I get mated at the end.
All about tricks, Alejandro.
It's all I am. Check, king e2, somewhere g3, I'm not sure. Take on e5, check. Here, this is not mate.
No, not
and
yet.
This looks like this bishop should have a.
But what if I just simply go h5 now?
Yeah, maybe this is actually just bad for black, right? Because I am threatening now bishop f7, bishop g6.
That
Well-
might be a sad checkmate. And you don't have rook to a2, even a check.
You don't even have rook a2 because the bishop controls all of the light squares. This might be an important line though, because knight takes e4 is on the board. Let's take a look. Bishop c1.
Knight to c3, and I feel like at this point, of course, we have bishop takes a3, but
Do we have something
should have
else,
some
right?
other ideas as well. Maybe queen to c4?
Queen c4 looks very tempting. I don't think this works ever. That's not.
No,
that's never
probably
going to
not.
work. So queen b4 maybe.
Queen to b4, yeah. And not only that it defends the knight, but it also attacks my queen, creates this tension. Maybe let's try queen to d3, because whenever you respond with queen to b4, I want to have bishop to d2 and create that pin.
All right, I like this move here, but I think he's relying on queen b4.
And after bishop to d2, you have queen to d4 check.
Yes, this is an important check. You'll be forced to trade the queens, and then I'm not sure which pawn I recapture. I think it's the e pawn, but I'll be defending my knight.
Okay,
at
so
the
I
end.
tried all the squares for the queen except e3 and f3. Let's continue trying each one of them.
Process
It's
of
not our pieces.
elimination.
That's the key.
All
About
right, let's try this move. Queen b4 anyway,
Bishop to d2.
and now bishop d2 actually pins the knight, and I don't have this move as a check. Queen d4, bishop takes c3. This queen is defended by the rook, so this doesn't work.
This looks good for white.
I don't see it. All right, let me see what he has in store, right? Because this is the position. Bishop c1.
So knight takes c4 was played.
Yes, and yeah, we don't have a move yet. Knight takes e4, bishop c1. I don't have another move, right? It's knight c3. Otherwise, I lose a piece.
If you go to g3, then I'm going to do exactly the same. Queen to e3, and once again, you don't have a good way to defend both the queen and the knight on g3. It doesn't?
Well,
or are we missing something?
We might be missing a couple of things. If this queen moves, I don't know where to put it. First, if you go to e3, I have to calculate knight takes f5.
Correct.
But let's put it on
f3.
f3. The thing about f3 is that maybe I can retreat my queen here, but queen g3 always covers the rook, right?
Yeah.
Queen g3 covers the rook, so this is not an option. All right, what are we missing then? Knight g3, queen f3 just looks like game over to me.
This is the key position. I think we're missing something
We
here.
must be missing something, right? Knight c3.
And now queen to e3. That was the key move that we saw.
Queen
right?
e3, yes. I like this move.
What are we missing, Alejandro?
Um,
So let's go queen to a5.
there's a reason we always made it to the B group, but we never made it to the A group. I'm not sure what we're missing. I think it's time to ask the engine.
All right.
All right, well, Mr.
Ask and you shall receive, Alejandro. Ask
Yeah.
and you shall receive.
We do have a lot of games to look at.
Bishop to c1 is the right move.
Okay.
Queen to b4 seems to be the only response in the position. And actually, he just wants to give up the piece and play this position.
Oh.
And saying that right now, I'm threatening rook to b8, so you have to do
b8.
something about that.
As we expected, JJ Alimorandi has finished with a win against Abhimanyu Mishra. But yeah, I'm fascinating about this final position that you were showing us there, Cristian. It's a piece and pair of bishops.
But it doesn't seem there's a good way for you to unpin. For example, if you go something along the lines of bishop to d2, then I'm just simply going to double up on the b file. You have to defend with rook to e3, or you can give up the piece and accept the fact that I'm going to recapture my piece back.
Because
but now
C4,
after
yeah.
c4, you're just missing another defender. So you cannot do that. Maybe you can go rook to b2, but once again, rook to b8, and how do you get out of this pin without losing a piece? You can go bishop takes f7 and accept the fact that I'm going to get my piece back, but then you take this pawn, you're threatening checkmate on e8. I have to defend against the checkmate, and then we're going to have this position in which it seems like, well, white is very, very close to delivering the checkmate. The king on h8 is weak, but so is its correspondent on g1. That's why I'm going to play this move, knight to g4. Create my own threat of checkmate with rook to b1, and it seems like this gives black enough compensation. So I think maybe we're going to see something along the lines of this one. It seems like Hans has calculated this position correctly, took on e4, and I think he's going to be able to hold on and potentially make that draw.
What a beautiful resource. It's very easy to analyze the position. Bishop c1, you start looking at the knight jumps. That's always the first instinct. You want to preserve the piece, but a beautiful find there, trying to not retain the piece, just give it away and say the final position, there's still problems for white in terms of coordination. Very, very nice resource here by Hans Niemann. All right, let's move on to, I think we went around the horn. Let us go to some of the games that I thought were close to finishing, particularly this game between Raja Harshit and Chris Repka. We do see the move rook f3 on the board. I am trying to figure out what is the problem with d takes c4. I guess you just take back with check, but still, d takes c4, I take back with check, and this rook is hanging, of course. Even this is not, I'm not sure that white survives it. But this is probably completely unnecessary. Is there a direct win? We were looking at moves like c2. c2 looks very powerful. To start with this move instead, you are attacking the rook. The knight cannot take because of the pin. We mentioned you cannot take with the queen because bishop takes e3. And if you move the rook anywhere, I think now...
That is the question. How are you going to play now?
Where do you move the rook, though?
Rook to c1.
Rook c1, do I take on c4? Because if you take on d7, I take on e3, right? So you take check as
yes.
the only move?
Yes.
King here, and I'm posturing that you can't really defend this knight because you have to deal with rook d1 as a threat.
That's a big problem. That is indeed a big problem. So let's show that variation after queen to e2, potentially defending the knight. Now you can just simply take on e3.
Or rook d1
Or you can go rook to
d1 right
first.
away. Doesn't matter.
Take, and then that knight on e3 is not going to have enough defenders.
Yep.
That's going to be a win for black. So let's go back a couple of moves. Maybe I have to go rook to e1, reinforce the defense of this knight on e3.
True, though I'm really wondering if it changes much, right? So I could take on c4 anyway.
And then I'm going to take back.
And then you take back with check.
And then I'm going to capture that pawn on c2 as well.
And the question is, do I have any way to increase my pressure on d3? It doesn't seem like I have anything direct.
No.
No, the queen is defending f5.
And it seems like that shield of pawns in the center protects me.
Yes, yes. It feels like this is not quite enough. So I have to be a little bit more clever here. So c2, rook e1 is a much better move. And the question is, do I have anything here? Not so clear.
So maybe we shouldn't start with c2.
Yes.
Why don't we leave the pawn on c3?
Right, if there's no immediate tactic, then of course you want to retain the pawn on c2. It's already defended there. Don't put it somewhere where it can be taken. But what do we do?
This is a key position, by the way. And right now we see Chris Repka falling behind on the clock. He only has 6 minutes and 40 seconds left on the clock. This is a key moment right now. If you make a bad move, you're going to spoil the advantage. So we need to find something precise. What if you just simply double up on the d file?
I was absolutely looking at that. There were so many problems with the rook hanging in many positions. I like the move rook fd8. D takes c4 becomes a stronger threat in many, many scenarios. I think it's a threat immediately. Even a move like e6 might be met with d takes c4.
Exactly, and let's go through this variation because I was trying to understand what happens after queen takes d7. You take back on d7, and now bishop takes e3. Yes, of course, you take back with the pawn, getting ready to promote that second pawn. And after bishop takes e3, I have the extra move, bishop to d2.
Yeah, let's point out that you cannot take this bishop. Yes, it's true that the queen doesn't get back on time, but the queen will pick up the rook, right? How?
Let's see.
It gets back to d8, right? Good check. This is the only move, by the way. The king needs to get closer to the rook to defend it. You give a check.
Yes.
You go up, I guess.
Yes.
Doesn't really matter at this point. You go check. And I think I can even staircase my way.
Pick up some more pawns.
Pick up more pawns. I eventually defend this.
And then you go to d8.
d8. There might be other ways to win. This might not be the most accurate or the engine way, but it's good enough. We only need one way to win, and it's not hard to calculate. So, yeah, rook f d8, e6 doesn't seem to work.
And we see a move was played.
I don't think it was rook f d8. It was the move. What did he play? He played bishop takes e3, and immediately Harshit took back on e3 with the rook. All right, this is a surprising move to me because he could have taken on e3 at any point. The only reason I would have done this is because there's a direct win in this position. So let's try to find out the direct win.
If there is one.
If there is one, right? And I'm assuming that he saw something here. Is it like d takes c4 anyway?
Well, d takes c4, I'm just going to recapture with a check.
Yeah, I'm wondering how to evaluate this, though. You take on d7, and I take on e3, right?
King. I don't know, it feels like my pieces are getting extremely active. And anytime you play the move c2, so let's say you even get with the queen to support that move c2, maybe potentially get... Well, actually,
where does this king go?
g2,
king g2, let's go.
You don't have any checks.
You have no checks here.
Well, that's a problem, because the rook on f8 is not doing anything, and you cannot include it into the game by taking on f5 because you're going to get checkmated. So you first have to do something along the lines of h6, trying to create a luft.
You know, the funny thing is I look at this position, and I feel that my position was so good.
Yeah.
Why would I go into this variation where I have to play h6? If I don't have a direct win, I don't think I would have ever taken on e3.
Very good question.
So I'm wondering, this is very typical, right? You don't release the pressure on the knight unless there's a direct reasoning for it. There's a direct advantage. The only advantage I can consider is that here, I force you to take so that I can play d takes c4. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. I mean, there's some argument to playing d4.
And now we see a very experienced move by Harshit. He gets up from the board and leaves.
Yeah.
And lets his opponent stew.
Yes.
Right now in his own thoughts, because he only has 3 minutes on the clock. Now he feels a bit more secure without an opponent in front of him. He's going to be like, okay, I can take my time, right? But no, you cannot take your time because you're going to go down to your last minute, and that's going to be a big, big problem going forward because this position remains extremely complex.
Right. It's one of those positions where your instinct tells you there's something direct. And sometimes, once in a while, there actually isn't. You end up spending tons of time looking for it, and maybe you don't find it or it didn't exist at all, and the tables turn quickly as you are unable to keep up the position. Maybe the move rook f5 is simply what he's trying to do.
I think he played c2.
Really?
Or maybe d4. C2 or d4. He pushed one of his pawns.
He played c2. The move c2 is on the board. We think the move rook d e1 is more or less forced here, right? You do need to defend this rook. But
seems like it. So if you go rook to c1, let's just show that on the board. I think after d takes c4, the game is pretty much over.
Yeah, because this rook is always hanging in pretty much every variation. Rook d1, as we mentioned, also a problem. Even though this is less clear than the other line, because you have king f2, maybe a couple more resources. But it still looks hopeless, right? Rook d2 coming, the king is very exposed. But let's take a look at what happens in the more logical rook d e1.
And c2 was a very committal move.
Very committal. And rook d1 played instantly. Of course, it makes sense to defend the rook.
Well, this is starting to get very
really
complicated.
Sure, right? Queen c2 is now a real threat. To the point where d takes c4, I'm actually picking up both pawns, and I think white's better.
Yes.
White was straight up better.
Yes.
So what is this
White is
idea?
going to be a pawn up. if I manage to pick up both pawns. It's going to be a pawn up, and I'm going to have a very dangerous passed pawn on the e file.
What is the... I don't get it.
Okay, he played something. I think he played queen to c5.
Oh, is this what we were missing? Doesn't look like it.
He did play queen to c5.
All right, so he's just trying to create a pass pawn again, like pass c pawn part 2. I assume queen takes c2. The idea is to go d takes c4. Of course, the move d4, preparing a discovery, doesn't work because I can just block this pawn. So
and this answers your question, Alejandro. Why did he relieve the tension with bishop takes e3? To create another square for the queen to go to c5.
Yes. Still, I feel that this wasn't the cleanest.
Definitely not the cleanest, but it does feel like black preserves an advantage here, right? That pawn on the c file going to c3, supporting the rook potentially to get to d to invade like that. You have to do something fast with white. You have to put your majority in the center in motion.
I still like black. I feel like he missed the win.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there was a win earlier, but all right, we can actually do want to go back. I'll just cheat a little bit. I do have an engine as well, so just so we can move on. But yeah, rook fd8 was winning in the way that we saw, but the computer thought that bishop takes e3, rook takes e3, and still rook fd8. It actually did not like the move c2 as much, but still gives black a very strong advantage. Not as strong as on the line that we suggested, but still quite decisive. I'm a little bit surprised that it's as big as it says, but doesn't seem to have spoiled the game just yet. How are we doing on the clock here after the move queen c5? 3 minutes and 18 seconds for Chris Repka. Roger Harshit with about 15 minutes left on the clock, plenty of time for him. Now, we did have a lot of games that were about to finish as we started our commentary. We expected one to finish a little earlier than it did, but we do have a winner of today's round, my student, JJ Alimorandi, here with Cristian Chirila.
Thank you, Alejandro. Yes, we are here with JJ, who bounced back in style after yesterday's loss. JJ, tell us, first of all, how does it feel to be back here in St. Louis and play at the St. Louis Chess Club?
It's amazing. I mean, as always, it's great to be playing here. And I was very upset when the Classics got canceled due to COVID, but it's great to be back, and it's good to be bouncing back after a tough loss yesterday.
And it's great to have you back and your typical brand of fire chess on the board. Tell us a little bit about yesterday's game, but also about today's game.
Yeah, yesterday things, of course, didn't go too well. I wanted to surprise Chris out of the opening a little bit, but I think he surprised me back with a slightly unexpected move. So, I mean, I checked the h4 line, actually, but I didn't look at the move knight f3. So I wasn't very aware of those positions. And after the opening, I got a very unpleasant position, and of course it was very tough to get back, and he didn't give me any chances. So, but today I wanted to play for 2 results, a win or if a loss, but definitely draw was not in my mind. So I wanted to bounce back, and I'm lucky, and I got the prep in, and it worked out well.
Let's get right into the game. Alejandro, maybe you can pull that on
right
your
here.
board and take us through the game, JJ.
Yeah, so lately he has been playing the semi-Slav, and I played the semi-Slav like my whole life. So I thought that this G3 system can be annoying at times if black is not 100% sure of how to handle it. And he played one of the most principled lines, of course, but it's super sharp, so it's exactly what I wanted for today. Knight d7, e4, bishop b7. Although it says dubious, it's actually it's the main line. And after knight d5, knight g5. Yeah, black can also play bishop e7, but I think h6 is the main move. After bishop e7, it goes on with queen h5, g6, and so on.
And, don't tell him all your secrets, right? Remember, he's there listening and taking notes.
Yes. So after h6, yeah, the main move is knight e6, but of course that has a lot of lines where I think white is still playing for something.
Right.
But it's too complicated, and it's like 30 moves of theory. But I think knight ge4 is underestimated because not that many people play it. First of all, white is down a pawn, and but I think there is a lot of compensation, of course. Queen b6, natural. Black wants to probably castle long at times. and bishop e3. I
It
think
seems
is-
like at this point he was still within his preparation. He was playing quite fast.
Yeah, I think he was surprised with bishop e3, and there are only like 2-3 games in this position. And the idea is actually simply to defend the pawn on d4. And I might want to go queen g4, queen h5 sometimes, and the pawn on d4 has to be defended. I'm never afraid of knight takes e3 because f takes just opens up the f file. And
That's going to be a big problem on the f7 square.
yeah, queen h5 is coming or queen f3 is coming, and it's very, very tricky. Okay, in my opinion, he played the most logical human moves, and that is what I mostly checked. And yeah, here the move b3 I think was important.
Where do you feel his big mistake came?
His big mistake came at after I played bishop f4 in the game. So I was still in my prep until here. And as far as I remember, after bishop f4, black has to play h5 for some reason. And I don't remember exactly what happens if I move the queen. I know computer screams queen takes h5. But at the end it's a draw somehow. But I have no idea what happens if the queen goes back. So
Taking notes, I'm never allowing my students to play this variation.
Queen b4, rook ac1, and it seemed that the pressure on both sides is very difficult for black to deal with. I like that despite the fact that black structure is very solid, it's just a piece activity. It's non-existent.
yeah, it's like alpha 0. And yeah, I mean after queen b4 I was out of book, but to me it's just very unplayable to play with the black pieces. I don't know if I played it perfectly, but it felt good. So
Oh, I felt like a very clean game.
yeah.
The move queen h5, the computer is not in love with, but it still gives you a huge advantage.
Okay.
And after this, rook c7, it was basically game over. It's very difficult to defend
Yeah.
the black king and all the pieces at the same time.
Yeah, after bishop c8, I actually was going to play h takes g5. I thought that was the winning line. After takes, bishop takes, king d6. I thought rook fc1, but there's queen e1 check. And I was super annoyed when I saw this.
Ooh.
Because after rook takes rook h5, bishop f4, I think he can play e5. And I have 3 pieces hanging at the same time. And I have no idea. Like, I can go rook d7, I guess, but why am I going to be down in exchange for no reason?
Actually,
he
maybe
can,
a full rook.
yeah,
right?
he takes with the king,
d7.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
was not happy when I saw that, so I just played rook fc1 immediately. And I think at that point, the game should be over.
Yeah, the game is, by all practical means, over. Very nice bounce back here, as Abimanyu wasn't able to defend his position. Good job, 1 out of 2, not bad at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bad.
Clean game, JJ. Congratulations, and
Thank
we're
you,
looking
thank
forward
you.
to see you in the next rounds.
Yeah, hopefully.
We also have another result as another collegiate clash in Aram Hakobian versus Camille Dragoon has finished in a victory for the Webster player Aram Hakobian. We had looked at that rook endgame, and pull it up right now. That did look pretty lost. We were mentioning this pawn on d3, it's going to be corralled. If you push this pawn, rook b4 is going to leave issues on the pawn on c4. And after d2, rook b6 check, the king doesn't have a good choice. If you go back to c7, then these rooks are going to win the game. This rook d6, I think, is one of the many ways you can win, but I think this is the human easiest way to do it. And this endgame with the pass pawn on the a file, but the rook behind the pawn instead of in front of the pawn is known to be quite hopeless. Although I'm sure there are many other ways to win it. After king d5, blocking the rook coming here, king takes d2 was played, and the rest was easy for white. And speaking of this game, we do have the Aram with us to explain exactly how he won this nice game.
Thank you, Alejandro. Yes, we are here with another victor of today's round, Aram Hakobian. Aram, welcome to the studio. Tell us how it feels after this important victory for you.
Well, it feels great, obviously, but mainly I didn't do much, to be honest, in the game because it was all prep till I got the a7 pawn. So after that, it was kind of easy. It was just matter of technique, so it was kind of a smooth game.
Let's look at the position as you were mentioning. So all the way until you picked up that a7 pawn. Let's see. Did you
all
feel
this-
like he was aware of your preparation?
No, absolutely not. I think he was kind of surprised that I knew till Queen A4.
And we see right now on the clock, if I'm not missing that, is 15 minutes against 1 hour and 26 minutes.
Yeah, I think.
Wow.
Actually, at this point, he has 10 minutes, right?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, my
I think
goodness.
instead of A4, I could also take on A7, but I thought that A4 is kind of the killer move.
Mm-hmm. Explain to us a little bit why.
Well, because if I take on A7, he can go Rook A8,
Yes.
and let's say I go back, Bishop E3, King D7, and it's not so easy. I'm pawn up, but you know he controls the squares. King E6, H5, and maybe C5
And whenever you
at
go
some point.
A3, maybe he can break with B4 and try to create some counter chances.
Yeah, indeed. So after A4, I think, I'm not sure, his best chance was probably to castle.
What if he tries to maintain his pawn with A6?
A6 was a move, but takes Rook A7, and he's kind of stuck. I go just Rook A1, Rook B7, and it's pretty bad. He just cannot move any pieces. Yeah, if he goes Bishop D8 something, I go Bishop C5.
Yeah, this looks
So
hopeless.
it's just lost.
Really bad. Yeah, but in the inclusion of A4 and B4 now taking on A7, of course, you have a passed pawn that changes the dynamics of the position, making the conversion much, much easier.
Which you actually did. Well, that was a very smooth game. And yesterday, it felt like you got an advantage as well with the black pieces against Alex Lenderman. It feels like you're in great shape. How do you feel about your shape?
Well, it's 2 rounds, and in both games, opening went pretty well for me. So there's still like 7 rounds to go, so we'll see. Hopefully, I'm in good shape. Yeah.
Did you prepare a lot for this tournament?
Yes.
Well, and it's showing. A very dangerous player, certainly studying over at Webster University, about 20 minutes away from here. One of the leading players over there, and certainly a dangerous one for us.
Aram, congratulations.
Thank
We're
you.
looking forward to see you in the next few days.
Thank you.
Congratulations on your victory. He says he didn't do much, but that's absolutely not true. There is a ton of work that goes into these games, and you can see them over the board. You can see how much prep these players are putting on. We just saw JJ Alimorandi explaining his deep preparation. You just saw Aram Hakobian showing his deep preparation. Chess is hard, guys, and you need to be very precise. Let's take a look at the complications that are arising in the game between Ilya Nishnik and Hans Niemann. This is to be what my producer is going through. A little bit of time pressure, but not too much. What is going on here? Black is down a piece. Am I counting that right? That's 1 knight. That's 2 bishops.
I think so.
I think.
I think you are.
I think. Okay. Good. I don't quite see the threats.
Wait, so it seems like Hans did not manage to hold on
Yeah.
to
What
his
what
piece.
happened here?
What happened?
All right, so we looked at knight takes e4, bishop c1, and just as we were singing his praises that he found all this rook takes b5 stuff, he didn't find any of that stuff. He actually went for the move knight c3, and queen e3 was played. As we were mentioning, we were worried about this move, actually, queen e3, because you attack the knight on d4, but more importantly, you don't allow this move queen b4 and d4 being checked. So that's where the queen goes to e3, not to another square. We're being told that Sam Savian has drawn his game. We'll come back to that one against Misha Antipov. But this looked to us like a piece, and it still looks to me like a piece. And black is
Piece for a pawn, but those 2 bishops, and you actually, well, you do have the threat of rook to h4. That's your only idea, right? You're trying to give some sort of a checkmate. But there has to be a way in which I can avoid that.
I mean, even bishop e1, I just don't really see. Just retreat the bishop, control that square. You're going to start fluttering around with moves like rook g4, but on the worst case scenario, I think you can start bringing the queen and defend on the 3rd rank. And indeed, Nishnik thinks like I do. After queen h5, he says, well, your threat's obvious. Just put the bishop on e1. Defend that important square. Don't allow the rook to join the fray on h4.
It looks completely hopeless.
It looks hopeless to me. This is just an extra piece. And the powerful pawn on b5 makes sure that the conversion is very easy. Yeah, I think Ilya's going to bring this one home without any problem.
And just to show you how that game finished between Sam Savian and Mikhail Antipov, because we were watching this game and we saw Antipov have only 5 minutes for the last 13 or so moves, and in quite a difficult position. At least that's how it looked like. At this point, we were considering moves such as bishop to f7 or king to f7 to defend the pawn on g6. But he decided to go a completely different route with this critical move and very concrete. Rook to d1, immediately threatening these rooks on the first rank. Now, if you take on g6, it seems like white is just simply breaking through and potentially going to give a checkmate. But after rook takes b1, you can continue taking on h7. I'm going to get my king out for a walk. Queen to h4, king to g6. And now my king is going to be quite well protected on the light squares. If you recapture on b1, which at some point you will have to do it, well, I'm simply going to go queen to c2. There is no way you can include this rook into the attack against the king. And you're going to lose a piece because this is a double attack. You can throw in another check, but I'm just simply going to hide away on f7, and that's that. You cannot do that. Misha Antipov calculated everything very precisely, left that pawn on g6 hanging, played this move rook to d1, and that forced white's hand. He played the move queen to c7, rook to d7. Now you have to drop back to g3, rook to d1. We saw this repetition, and the game finished in a draw.
Fabulous resource there by Misha Antipov. I love the concreteness of it. Yes, you're attacking g6, but instead of feeling a defensive maneuver, he immediately went for the counterattack, and it paid off, solving all of his problems. Let's jump back to this Raja Harshit against Chris Repka game, because wild stuff has happened in this game. Let's take a look. As after the move queen c5, we didn't see queen takes c2. We thought that position would be very good for the black side, but instead the move e6 came on the board. D takes e4, this seems very concrete. Queen takes d7, c1 queen. This distracts this rook on e1 from the defense of the e3 rook. So no choice, rook takes c1, queen takes e3 check, king g2, and now black doesn't pick up one rook, picks up both rooks. This is why this is so powerful. But after e7 check, king g1, Raja is saying, yes, you got an extra rook, but how are you going to stop this pawn? This pawn on e7 is currently attacking the rook, also gearing to play e8. And of course, if you just play the move rook b8 or something along those lines, this is not just a recovery of the rook, that's actually checkmate. So you cannot even consider that. It feels like there should be a win.
Well, what you have to do right now, you just have to centralize the queen and play the queen endgame with a move queen to e4. A centralized queen, we know, is extremely powerful. And you do have, even if white manages after e takes f8, king takes f8, first of all, I'm protecting against any sorts of checks on the e file, which is extremely important because it allows me to escape with my king via f6. So for example, if you go queen to c8, king to f7, or queen to d8, king to f7, queen to d7, then I can just simply push my king forward, king to f6, and the queen on e4 protects absolutely everything.
I love this move, yeah.
And you also, it doesn't seem like there's a clear way of reaching that b4 pawn without allowing my king to enter the play, which is just going to be game over.
Instead of this, queen b1 was played, and the move king f2 came on the board. I'm wondering if he's considering playing the same thing, but picking up this pawn on a2 check first. Of course, that does give me the option of
I'm going to hide my king after that.
Yeah, yes. You kind of do hide your king, and I don't get back to e4 on time. I feel that, especially in queen endgames, the value of your pawns is so much more important than the quantity of your pawns. You don't really need that extra pawn on a2. You already have the passer on c4. And
once again, he has to do the same thing. Queen to e4, centralize the queen, and he does it.
Queen e4, and that is move 40, I believe, for Chris Repka.
Yes.
A big sigh of relief as he gets the extra 30 minutes. It still looks like a winning position. Perhaps not the best technique ever, but still good enough throughout. It doesn't seem that he destroyed his advantage at any point.
No, queen to e4 is a very, very technical move, centralizing the queen. And yeah, you just simply don't have a good way to continue with checks against my king, because every single check is going to push my king forward, which I want. It's something that I want, because I want to get to that f5 pawn followed by f4 pawn and so on. And there's simply no way in which you can continue this game. You will have to take on f8. There's no other way to keep that pawn on the 7th rank.
Just to point out that there would be this idea of queen d8, perhaps trying to be a little bit more clever. But first of all, I can always take on d8. It doesn't really change
I
much.
can do that, but I can also pick up some pawns.
You can start picking up the pawns you played. Yeah, you just pick up everybody. So this is just not going to work out for the white side. As you mentioned, in that case, e takes f8 is forced, but not a fun endgame here for the white side.
No, you're a pawn down, and I'm the one with the passed pawns, and that is extremely important.
This pawn on c3 is just rolling.
Yep, and he takes on f8, which will be followed by king takes f8.
And a long suffering here for white. Maybe not even that long, right?
Probably not.
Probably not. All right, speaking of that, let's take a look at what's happened in the Ray Robson against Alex Lenderman game. We thought that Ray had a decisive advantage when we left it off. Let's see what's transpired since then.
He still has a decisive advantage.
All right, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7 is where we left it off. f6 is...
Not only that, but I think we just saw a resignation.
Well, resignation there by Alex Lenderman. We'll have Ray Robson in the studio soon then to explain this game to us. Let's jump to some of the others, as I think some people are still in time pressure. Anything that catches your eye, Cristian? Ooh, this Hungaski game actually catches my eye.
Yes.
What is going on? There's a king on f7. Rook takes g4 was just played. Is this just game over?
Well, it's just game over.
Yeah, rook takes g4. We're going to see a resignation here because queen takes f2, which is the only move I can see, is met with simply rook f4 check. That's a double attack on the king and the queen on the f-file. That'll just finish the game. So he plays on probably both players in time pressure. Sometimes, as they say, you just don't have enough time to resign. But queen e3, I think, would just force a handshake.
Queen e3 is the easiest.
The easiest, but I'm sure that
there's some checkmates on the board probably, but you're not going to calculate that. You just want to exchange the queens.
Yeah, the professional way is queen e3.
Don't
there
say
you go. No,
don't
there you
say
go. Queen e3. He's a professional. I mean,
He's
Robert
a professional.
Hungaski has played chess all over the world. He plays tournaments after tournaments. He had a good streak recently, and he knows how to finish those games.
And as you were mentioning, that just simply forces a resignation.
Yes, and Sam there. Sorry, Arman cannot be feeling good about this game. It was very complex, but in time pressure, it seems that he got outplayed. We might not have time for Robert because we are expecting Ray, but we will see the end of this game in just a little bit. Actually, let me go to where the decisive mistake was, because it does seem like this is still very complicated. You can see this king is kind of weak on f7, but it shouldn't be the end of the world. Check king g8. I would like to coordinate to a checkmating attack. This king on c1, it does give me some hopes for counterplay. I think if the king, as we mentioned, was on a1, this wouldn't be the case, but with the king on c1, you can start seeing moves like bishop f5, queen e4. Unless you have a direct checkmate, maybe not such a big deal. Bishop e3 actually trying to transfer over the bishop to create threats on the h8 square as the bishop on h6.
That was a very crafty move. I really like that bishop e3 move.
Not
only that you try to go bishop to d4 and create the checkmate threat, but also rook to g1 is coming.
I like this threat of rook g1, and here perhaps in time pressure, the young player from Texas Tech was unable to find a good way. I'm wondering if you have. I'm wondering what.
Well, probably there is no good way.
No, I like f2. I'm not really sure what you play against f2, to be quite honest with you. The point is that I'm covering rook g1, and if you take on c4, we have been talking over and over again about the counterplay that you can get in this position with the move queen f4. I will at least pick up this bishop, but I think even like king c2, queen f3 might be easier. This looks lost for white. So I'm wondering why not f2.
I like that move, yeah. That's a very good move.
Well, time pressure makes a fool of us all.
My guess is that he just didn't want to defend the endgame after queen to d4.
Or queen d4 or queen g5 I was looking at.
Either one.
Either one, yeah. And you take, and you do lose this pawn. I feel this is a defensible endgame, but of course it's white that is in the driver's seat as they'll be up a pawn. No way to defend this pawn on f2 on time. But after the move bishop e3, rook f8, queen e5, I have a... Apparently this is a blunder. And after queen e5, I guess the white is just about properly consolidated. You don't have this resource anymore because there is no queen f4. And that means that both bishop d4 and rook g1 are huge threats, unable to really figure out which one. Actually, f2 was played. He must be kicking himself for not playing it earlier. Bishop takes f2, queen f3, doesn't help his cause, and after rook g1, the king was simply hunted, and then we got to the position that we saw. Cristian, what do you have with us in another game?
Well, I'm looking at the game, a very important matchup between Dariusz Wiertz and Jeffrey Chong, because we saw the position at the beginning and it seemed like White has a lot of pressure, despite the fact that he was a pawn down from the early onset. But unfortunately, it seems like Black slowly got his way back into the game, and now we see this position.
Whoa.
Rook takes some madness happening in the position. Of course, after rook takes g5, you don't want to take back on g5 because right now is just going to be potentially a perpetual after queen to f6, queen to g5. So instead of that, Jeffrey says, okay, you took on g5, but you have your queen under attack and the rook under attack, so I might as well just sidestep this threat. You
That
can
is
go queen to h4 or
cold-blooded.
queen to h5, but that's just going to allow me, give me an extra tempo, take on g5, and then defend the dark squares with queen to e7. That would be game over. Dariusz says, no, I'm going to take on f5, I'm going to threaten checkmate. Do you want to take the rook? Of course not. That's going to finish the game in one move. But I do have
rook
this
g8.
intermezzo attacking the queen, rook to g8. I believe this is the position we currently have on the board, and in fact, this might just be game.
That's like an extra rook.
He might have just resigned because I
Now
don't
he's
see any
still
moves.
thinking. We see him on camera.
This is move 40. So
Yeah.
he is getting extra time right now. Yes.
It's very sad. You get extra time to contemplate your downer rook.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is just game over. It is a full rook. It's too much material.
Yeah. This one went south extremely quickly for
But
the youngster.
we
from
also
Slu.
saw it coming, right?
Yeah.
You saw the amount of time that he spent on his moves, and you think this is unsustainable. It's a very complicated position. You cannot be spending this much time on every move. And Jeffrey is an excellent calculator. He puts in the bait of the g5 pawn. And in time pressure, Dariusz is unable to figure out if this pawn that's dangling in front of him is poisoned or not. And now he is going to pay the price. He's going to have to resign this one very soon.
And this was the critical moment indeed after knight to d3, queen to d7. Right now, he only had 34 seconds. And you see e5, you see that weakens the stronghold of this pawn on g5, and you feel like you're breaking through and you're going to deliver the checkmate. Unfortunately, it's just a forced loss after a rook to g5, king to h8, and now you're forced to give up the rook. Quite a sad outcome for Dariusz Wiertz, but Jeffrey, with a potential victory, is going to move on to 2 out of 2.
2 out of 2, an excellent start there for the youngster. Not unfamiliar with how to win this tournament. He's actually won the Spring Chess Classic A Group 3 times. Gearing for a 4th, definitely a good start there for the player from Dallas, Texas. Let's take a look at what else we have. It seems that another game that might finish very soon, another one in which we have a rook advantage for one of the sides. Ilya Nishnik is currently playing against Hans Niemann. You can see that this extra rook looks pretty free. I mean, you do have some maybe problems with the move h4 coming, but I have the feeling that with such a huge amount of material, there should be an easy or at least comfortable way of defending. A rook is a rook. I don't expect Hans to survive this one. That would be a nice win for Ilya. I think he goes to 1.5, right? He drew
1.5
7
out
yesterday.
of 2, yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, we do have one of the winners of today's round with a very important one there from St. Louis, Ray Robson.
We are indeed with a local superstar, Ray Robson, after an incredible victory. Ray, first of all, congratulations. Welcome to the studio. How does it feel to be back here in St. Louis playing over the board chess?
Yeah, thanks. It feels good to be playing again. Also, of course, good to get a win. I mean, Alex is probably my hardest ever opponent considering rating. I think I'm usually slightly higher rated, but I mean, he's beaten me several times, and I think I maybe beat him once in our recent games when we had like many draws, which was a good accomplishment for me because before that I was losing a lot of games.
And yesterday also was a razor-sharp battle against Hans Niemann. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, that was a very interesting game. I mean, Hans, well, we played a very theoretical line, which I guess was expected because Hans seems to be very well prepared and in general. So we played a line where we were actually following a game between Abdusattorov, the World Rapid champion, and Anish Giri. And I think I deviated from that game with the move G5. We both knew about this game. I just couldn't remember during the game whether Anish played knight d7 first or whether G5 was played first. So I just kind of thought on my own, and I thought G5 might not be what he played, but it should be a reasonable move anyway. And I think...
How do you feel about the tactical battle that ensued towards the time control?
Yeah, I mean, I missed one move of his queen a2, which even though objectively I should still be okay after that, it kind of changed the balance of the game. And then after that, I was struggling because I was lower on the clock and there was a lot of pressure in my position. And I played the move c5, which weakened d6, which was a big mistake. And after that, yeah, I felt like he should be winning there. But he missed his chances. He should have been a little bit more decisive there. And yeah, after the time control, actually, I was the one who had chances and actually had a few wins. They weren't super obvious, but in general, it was very unpleasant to play his position. So yeah, it was a little bit disappointing that I couldn't win from that point. But on the other hand, it was good that I didn't lose the game. So I guess the draw was kind of a fair result.
Well, yesterday is history. Today was a much smoother game. Take us through that.
Yeah, so we got a little bit of an unusual line. I mean, he played one of the main lines with g6 and d5, and the line I played against it with h3, c5 is known, but normally white just captures on d5 immediately. But this is an interesting way to play because you stop bishop g4, and the idea is you want to put the bishop on b5, and you always have the idea to take the knight off on c6, and you control e5 very well. And yeah, it seemed like Alex didn't really know this line too well, although the way he reacted was logical. So castles, bishop b5, knight e4, castles. And I think this is still the main line, and I believe queen a5 is supposed to be the best move here, most likely. But he took and he played queen c7, so I wasn't really super familiar with these positions. I just assumed white should be somewhat better, but I wasn't sure how because black is obviously aiming to play b6 and break up my pawn on c5. And after that, structurally, it feels like black's completely fine. At least that's how it felt to me. So I figured I should try to at least develop a tempo. So rook e1, bishop g5 made sense, queen d2, b6, all very logical. And yeah, now bishop h6 was interesting. Basically, I was trying to scare him, make him afraid that I'm exchanging dark square bishops is bad for him and try to make him play bishop f6 or bishop h8. And I thought in either square it's like a slight improvement for me compared to having his bishop on g7, which is kind of funny. So he went bishop h8, and then, yeah, the whole time I'd been planning to play bishop f4 at some point, but here I realized maybe it makes sense to just give up on the idea of maintaining that sort of pressure and switch to the king side. So I took and played h4, and suddenly h5 is coming. It's nice that I have this bishop on h6 versus the bishop on h8. Suddenly his king feels a little bit shaky, and I think here is where he probably started to feel some pressure. And yeah, for the rest of the game, it felt like I was definitely the one putting pressure on him. I wasn't sure about the objective evaluation. I thought I had some advantage, but I think his decisive mistake was definitely queen a8.
We were shocked about that move.
Yeah, I also, like I saw he had a few minutes before he had kind of reached for the queen, so I thought, okay, maybe he wants to play queen a7.
Yeah.
But I thought that was also a bad move because queen a7, maybe just queen e2, and if rook takes a2, I have rook takes e7. It's a very nice mate. If he takes e2, I take on e8, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, king g7, and I have h6, king f6, and mate with the bishop somewhere. So, yeah, and in general, if he's losing e7, I thought my position is probably close to decisive. So I didn't understand. I assumed he realized that, and then he was going to make a different move. But then he played queen a8, which was like even more surprising. Yeah.
Did you talk to him after the game? Did he say what he?
Yeah, it seemed like, I don't know. To me, I evaluated that he just can't give up e7. He did obviously miscalculate something. So after rook e7, bishop f6, I was pretty sure the only reason he could have gone for this is because he thought after, let's say, rook e1, that he could at least take back on a2, which he actually can't because I can do the same trick with queen a2, rook e8, and h6 mate. So he did blunder this. He told me after the game. So I could have just gone rook e1, and my position should be close to winning. But then I thought queen e3 might be objectively like much stronger,
Much
even
more decisive, yeah.
So I thought about it for a good while, and then I went for it. I mean, just in general principles, like the dark square weaknesses in black's position, me having this bishop and my king is super safe. Like it has to be winning, but of course I tried to calculate some lines. So he played f6, which I actually didn't see at all. Probably the best practical defense. I think what I did looked very logical. I stopped him from going to f8 with his queen, so he's really tied down. b5, I believe he played. Knight e5, queen e8. Yeah, and here I spent a lot of time because I completely hallucinated something. I thought he actually can't move like either his rook or his queen really anywhere, so I can kind of just do whatever I want. I can play d5, d6, d7. And suddenly I realized if d5 he actually has one move, which is queen e7. So I couldn't find the forced win there, and I got pretty low on time. But it felt like I was still probably in control with what I did, but I wasn't completely sure.
It seemed clean enough to us, at least from the commentator's booth, that it was just fully controlled from start to finish. After d6 is just game over.
d6 was after d6 it was definitely over. He can't take his queen b7, and otherwise the knight comes to e7. He's just getting mated, so after this it was over.
Just came down to the simple principle of king safety, and definitely your king was much safer than his. Ray, congratulations, a very good start for you, and good luck in the rest of your games.
Thanks.
A nice start there with 1.5 points for Ray Robson with a clean victory over Alex Lenderman, putting the pressure, and his opponent certainly cracked. Let's take a look at what we have left. I'm curious on the Harshit game against Repka. To me, that's the most interesting one. It looks quite lost unless there's an immediate perpetual. This king on d5 seems like it's just running down the board, going to be helping this pawn on d3, on c4 promote. Certainly, the queen on e4 is doing a monster job of covering many, many squares. This looks over to me. This seems like it's going to be a win for Chris Repka. A good start for him. I believe he will jump to 2 out of 2.
2 out of 2 indeed. Yeah.
And I don't think there's another player on the B group with 2 out of 2 that I can remember.
No.
Because Elshan, we felt, was suffering, and Raja is precisely the one. Sorry, Elshan is suffering, and the other winner of yesterday, Christopher Yu, actually drew against Titus Stremavicius. All right, we are ready with another interview as we have another winner of today's round. A lot of decisive results here in round 2 in the 2022 Spring Chess Classic. We have Robert Hungaski, who won a very nice game.
Thank you, Alejandro. We are indeed here with the rating favorite of group number B, Robert Hungaski. Robert, first of all, welcome to the studio and congratulations on this bounce back. How does it feel?
Feels good. After yesterday's game, I wasn't sure I was going to get, a chance to come up here and, show a win or something. It was just terrible.
You started off with 2 whites and you definitely delivered in this game. How does it feel, first of all, to be back over the board chess, to playing over the board
It feels great. Actually, I've been playing non-stop since things started to get more or less back to normal, like in November. Like tournaments just started popping up again, so I've just been, hitting it pretty hard.
You're a globetrotter. Where are you playing?
Huh?
Where are you usually playing?
Well, right now I'm living in Buenos Aires, so I usually have my tournament circuit in South America. I just played some tournaments in Buenos Aires, Brazil, Uruguay.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's look at today's game. We're going to see that on the screen right there.
All right.
Yeah, take us a little through some of the key moments. We had quite the unusual opening, but it seemed I particularly wanted to get to this complicated position where it seemed like both of you had weak kings, and it was very difficult for us to fully assess the position.
Yeah, it was pretty hard for me too. Yeah, I don't know about this g4 move. I mean, I went into this line thinking I could do g4. Maybe something like b3 first, and if a5 then g4. This could be an option because maybe it buys me a little bit of time.
Right.
But I know it looks scary, just creating that hook on b3.
Right.
Knight c5 is coming too, but I don't know. He's got to deal with f5 too, so I don't know. It was a little bit impulsive. Maybe I didn't pay enough attention to this possibility.
Interesting.
So I just went g4. Yeah. And yeah, at this point, things were a little bit, I started to realize things were a little bit more tricky than I first thought. For example, if I had gone f takes g4 instead of knight takes, he has this annoying queen f4 move again. And this pin is very annoying. And if I do something like queen d2, whenever I eventually kick the queen out, it's going to swing over to a4, and all of a sudden, I'm the one under attack. So
maybe knight to c5 right now?
Yeah, knight c5 is coming, queen a4. It just looks like black's attack is flowing a lot easier than mine.
Yeah, this certainly looks very dangerous for you.
Yeah, and this attacking pattern of bishop on e6, knight c5, and queen on a4 is something that's going to happen later in the game.
That's right. We did see it after knight takes g4, queen f4 check, rook d2, e4 was played.
Yeah.
And after bishop g3, queen g5, it wasn't quite a4, but it does also allow the queen to transfer over to the queen side.
Right. Yeah, kind of a similar idea. So yeah, maybe this h4, I don't know. It just seems to help his queen, swing over to the queen side. Maybe I should have just gone queen takes e4. But that also looks kind of sketchy.
After bishop to f5.
Or even rook e8.
Oh, well,
knight to c5.
knight c5 was something I was worried about.
Knight c5. I'm worried about every move here in this position.
Yeah. So I was kind of disappointed. I thought I was going to be the one attacking, and all of a sudden it get turned around on me.
But you handled it very well. After h4, you first played this really nice move. I liked it. The bishop on e2, not a very valuable piece in your arsenal at the moment, and it allows your rook to come to d7, and now, again, a double-edged position in which both sides are attacking.
Yeah, basically I was like, I've had enough of this knight coming to c5. I'm just going to get rid of it. Besides, we were very low on time at this point.
Yeah, I can see
I
5 minutes for you.
I don't know if bishop c4 might be the only move there, because there were a lot of moves I was looking at, and they all looked terrible for me.
Yeah.
And here, I was very surprised he played queen f5. I think this is a bad move. I was expecting rook f7.
Immediately, trying to exchange this rook.
Yeah, because I'm threatening rook takes g7 followed by, yeah, things like some bishop e5 ideas and queen e4.
It looks scary.
Yeah. The game starts to take an interesting turn here because this theme of the opposite color bishops starts to, become important.
Right.
And actually, if he had gone rook f7, maybe you guys can help me figure out what's going on here, because I was looking at rook takes, bishop takes, f takes e4, and after queen takes a2, bishop e5. Yeah. And here I think he has to go queen a1.
And it's probably going to be a drawish endgame, right?
I don't know, queen b1 takes, king takes, and he has this bishop g6 move.
Oh.
Oh.
Yeah.
Where did that
I
come
missed
from?
that move. And
I think how's the position after rook to g1? Rook g1.
I think he just takes and then takes on e5.
That's just going to be a pawn up.
Yeah, and goes king h7. I don't think I have any good discoveries there.
Yeah, I agree.
So I was looking, I was talking a little bit with my opponent after the game. I think I have to go like rook e1 there.
After bishop g6.
Yeah. But then I think he can just go rook e8.
I like rook e8. It's because
he's
after bishop
going to
takes.
drill on e4. It's going to be.
Well, maybe you can go knight to f6.
Actually,
Well, I have
knight
knight
f6.
f6.
I have a knight f6 here. Sorry.
No, but even if you just go king takes, right? And I go, I have to go knight f2. That looks very sad.
No, knight f6 before, after rook to e8, to just try to get into some sort of a opposite color bishop endgame.
Yeah, that's probably my best bet.
Yeah, but he wasn't looking for a draw. He was trying to win.
Just a second. Can you go king to h8 or even king to f8 right now?
Here?
Yeah.
Oh, and trap the knight.
No, king to f8. I think.
Yeah. I like this one better. Knight takes, and the point is that after bishop takes e5, actually the knight is trapped.
Nice.
Very nice. I like this variation a lot. Yeah, perhaps the rook f7 tempo was important, and swinging the queen to f5, actually, now that I see it more, it is a strange move because the queen was so active on a5, you always want to take on a2.
He told me he missed queen d2, and queen d2 is kind of a game changer because now I'm definitely threatening rook takes g7, followed by queen takes h6 and all that stuff.
Yeah, but still he had some chances to survive, and it seemed that his decisive mistake came even a little later here in this position. Did you consider the move f2 immediately?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I had like 30 seconds here.
Right, and that's tough, yeah.
I was like, I don't know, I'm threatening rook g1 and bishop d4, and it looks like a really unpleasant position for black. I mean, his king is so open.
Yes.
We thought that f2 just basically forces a transition into the endgame after queen to d4.
Right, because if bishop takes, then you have this check on f4, right?
Yeah, and you just
That's
lose.
very important.
Yes.
Wow. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, we thought either queen d4 or queen g5 you'd be up a pawn with, I'm not really sure how big of winning chances.
And I can't do something like, no, I'm going to lose if I go like rook f1 probably.
Yeah,
You have rook f8, right?
Yeah, we have rook f8 and then queen e2 if you don't trade the queens.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Yeah, so I have to go like queen g5, you were saying?
Or queen d4.
Or the queen d4. Yeah,
Queen d4.
But I thought queen d4, take on d4, take and rook e8. And then try
Maybe
to swing
king
the rook
D-
on the second rank.
King d2, bishop g4, right?
Something like that.
Right. Yeah, far from clear if black has quite enough. They probably have to survive the endgame, but much better than what happened in the game, of course, after rook f8, queen e5. It is lights out. The f2 resource doesn't really do nearly as much because of the check. A nice bounce back there for you, Robert. And I mean, it's been incredible to see you play around the world. It certainly followed that tournament in Montevideo. And it feels like your rating keeps going up and up and up.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully it'll keep, I'll keep the winning streak going.
Well, certainly it is done today as you bounce back to 1 out of 2. Congratulations on your win and good luck in the rest of the tournament.
Great, thank you.
All right, let's update some of the other results. We have a few games still going for you. I believe that Dariusz Schwirtz is still contemplating his loss against Jeffrey Chung. Sometimes that happens after you hit the time control and you don't want to face reality. But a rook is a rook. And that's just going to be the end of that game. Hans Niemann is still down a full... Well, you have a rook for 2 pawns, but unless there's an immediate trick, that being said, this didn't seem like the cleanest. Still, a rook is a rook. I mean, I played my king to h1, and I have trouble believing that black can really create enough. It's perhaps still requiring a couple of technical moves, but the material is so big, I just can't imagine that this is going to be sufficient.
Yeah, it does seem like black is getting some sort of counter chances, and the king is quite safe, surprisingly, on h6.
Yeah, it's a safe king, but then you realize that queen e8, queen g6 is actually checkmate, right?
So let's see. What if you just simply go, where do you want to put the king?
I think
King h2?
I'm actually thinking king h2, so
Might
that
run into some sort of knight f3 ideas.
yes, and
let's be careful about that.
Let's get into that, but I also didn't want this to be checked. But okay, king h1 is the more logical move, right?
Right.
And you go, I think you go queen d2
Or queen f2.
or queen f2. Either way, I do have to defend my rook. I don't have time for queen e8 because this is a check, and then you'll give a perpetual. Well, I don't know if you'll give a perpetual. You'll just pick up a rook and try to win.
You also don't want to defend that rook with bishop to b4 because that feels like it's taking the bishop on the wrong side of the board.
Yeah, you never want to put this bishop away from this diagonal. This does give probably an immediate draw, I think, after knight f3 check takes and check on g3. I think knight h3 did the same job. And here you don't escape the checks on f3, g3, h3. So I agree, this isn't really playable. So still perhaps some technical difficulties, right?
Some chances for black. Hans is fighting.
He's fighting. I don't believe in them, but he's fighting, as we see Nishnik. Well, let's take a look at the results of today that we have so far. Most of the games have finished.
It's been a wild round.
It was a wild round. We have Sam Sevian drawing against Misha Antipov. Aram Hakobian has defeated Kamil Dragun. Ray Robson has defeated Alex Lenderman. We expect Jeffrey Chung to be defeating Dariusz Schwirtz very soon with the black pieces, as well as we expect Ilya Nishnik to convert his extra rook against Hans Niemann after a couple of difficulties.
And in the B group, we have some decisive results as well. Actually, quite a few decisive results. We have 2 wins by Robert Hungaski and Alimorandi with the white pieces against Arman Mikhailian and Abhimanyu Mishra. And a win with the black pieces for Chris Repka, who moves on to 2 out of 2 and is the current leader of the tournament. Also a quick draw between Christopher Yu and Titas Stremavicius. And we still have 1 game pending, the battle between Sam Khanin and Elshan Moradiabad.
Yes, and well, Thank you, everybody, for joining us here in today's broadcast. We're going to finish it here. But remember, tomorrow we start commentary at 3:30 p.m. Central. Don't miss it. But the rounds start at 1 p.m. if you want to follow them live. And some of your favorite collegiate players here playing, or whoever you support. So make sure to tune in tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.
This has been a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club. Any reproduction or distribution of this content without the express written consent of the St. Louis Chess Club is prohibited.